Chapter 21. It was over a fragrant bowl of the mulligatawny served that day during the busy cafeteria lunch hour that Christy O'Keefe attempted to seek some semblance of refuge, albeit not as far from the madding crowd as he would have liked. Only minutes before, he had deposited Alice and Elspeth into the fray of the hospital's main lobby, where available elevators had sprung their doors open regularly, but only to reveal patients lying prostrate inside. They were being transported in hospital beds to their floors for various tests and procedures, no doubt, but there was little room left to accommodate any new passengers. Alice and Elspeth would just have to fend for themselves as they anxiously awaited their turn before continuing their journey upward to the 7th floor to check in on Jean Noel. Knowing Jean Noel to be in a fragile mental state, Christy thought it best not to confuse the poor boy's brain any further by subjecting him to an impromptu visit from the errant dishwasher of Nepenthe, with whom he had met but once before in Big Sur. Jean Noel, in his present condition, needed perforce to be surrounded only by the familiarity of those close to him, who would rekindle memories of the comforts of home as opposed to those he barely knew or who may have upset him in the past, and when seen out of context, might deepen even still the confusion of his feverish mind. Christy was thus content to settle into his less than comfortable seat in the bustling cafeteria and casually people watch as he savored to its last drop the hearty East Indian soup. While there was no shortage of activity upon which to focus his attention in the cacophonous room where trays clattered, babies cried, and indecipherable communications came through that were destined only for the ears of the medical personnel present to make sense of, nothing caught Christy's attention quite like the feminine figure nervously smoking a cigarette outside the plate glass window near the table at which he was sitting. There, in a small courtyard that had evidently been designated for smokers only, she sat along with several nurses on their breaks and a patient in a wheelchair who had puffed thoughtfully on a cigar. The figure in question sat as far apart from the others as the diminutive space would allow, but nonetheless quite close to a potted ficus tree, as if seeking whatever element of camouflage the slight tree had to offer. And yet, even though her head was covered Grace Kelly style by an Hermes scarf tied under her chin, and her eyes were concealed behind dark wayfarer sunglasses, still her identity was unmistakable to Christy O'Keefe. Her outward persona had changed but little in the over 20-odd years since he had last seen her, right down to the same pom-pommed terry tennis socks that she wore with sneakers and that peeked out from below the cuffs of her blue jeans. That was the Zouzou he remembered from his first glance of her sitting on a guardrail by the side of Highway 1 next to a car with its front hood raised on a perilous curve in Big Sur. Christy had been on his way to work at Nepenthe, but nevertheless he had made a risky U-turn up ahead. The highway curved dangerously with great frequency, and one turned around on it at great peril, but Christy had felt compelled to return to the seemingly abandoned figure smoking so compulsively on its shoulder. Upon his arrival, the woman removed her sunglasses, only to reveal eyes that were damp with tears and consequently smeared with the kohl that had once neatly rimmed just her eyelids. "Don't cry, darling," Christy admonished her. "I got jumper cables. Your car'll be all right in no time." "It's not for my car that I cry," she said, dismissively, putting out her cigarette and instinctively lighting up another. I know that my car can be fixed. It's for my life that I'm crying. It's my life that's irreparable. Now, darling, don't say that, Christy said encouragingly as he set about clamping one half of the jumper cables onto the battery of his Westphalia before attaching the other half onto the battery of her rental car. Life ain't ever that bad. I'll tell you what, you can follow me down the road to Nepenthe, and we'll get us a cup of coffee, maybe even some French toast. Then you can tell me all about your problem, and we'll see if there ain't no way we can fix it. How's that sound? And that, Zouzou had to admit, sounded like the nicest thing anyone had said to her for a very, very long time. Christy remembered all these years later that Zouzou liked her coffee sans sucre, but with a generous amount of milk, steamed if possible. And so it was that, having procured 2 cups of the brew to her liking in the cafeteria line, he made his way out to the tiny inner courtyard designated for smokers only and sat down directly next to her. "Come here often?" he quipped as he handed her a cup of coffee and awaited her shocked reply. "Mon Dieu, is that you? Is that really you?" she asked apprehensively while taking the coffee with a trembling hand. "Christophe, what in God's name are you doing here?" "Same as you, I reckon," Christy said, gazing up to the 7th floor of the hospital building. "Checking in on a dangerously ill boy." Zouzou seemed to take the statement in with some reluctance while sipping at her coffee, and then replied cagily, "Yes, I know. He told me he went to Big Sur and that he knows all about you." "Oh, it ain't me that he knows all about, darling," Christy stated unequivocally. "It's Byron. That boy thinks Byron is his father." "Byron," Zouzou reiterated with stunned surprise. "Yes, ma'am. I told you that boy is dangerously ill. His brain is done muddled with fever." And then, oddly changing the subject, he declared out of the blue, "By the way, Zoo, you know the poem I was writing for you that summer wound up winning a Pulitzer?" "What's that?" she asked distastefully. "Oh, nothing special, I guess. Just some old prize is all. Oh, and another thing, that picture I was painting of you and Nat and Byron in front of the goat house, dang, if that didn't make it into a famous art museum in San Francisco." "I really don't remember that at all," Zouzou responded indifferently, bringing a hand to her mouth as if to stifle a yawn. "I started that painting from a photograph, but had to finish it from memory on account of the photograph disappearing. You know, I think Natalie took it with her when she left. I don't hold it against her. She must have wanted a souvenir or something, but I got to admit it was a little upsetting at the time." Here Christy paused to pick up the cigarette that had fallen to the ground from Zouzou's quivering lips. Calmly he handed it back to her and then continued, "You know, I kind of figured you'd never tell the boy about me, but I wished you hadn't cut me off the way you did. I would have liked to have made a financial contribution to his upbringing." "It wasn't necessary," Zouzou quickly interjected. "Everything was—" Cutting her off in mid-sentence, Christy kept on unrelentingly. "But what I did kind of figure was that at some point in time, you and Nat would have straightened him out about who his mama was. Ain't that something every child has a right to know?" "It just became harder and harder as time went on," Zouzou said, with a noticeable shortness of breath. "The child was happy and well-adjusted. It honestly seemed like it would have been far crueler to tell him the truth than to let things be." "I understand, darling," Christy said with genuine sympathy. "It wasn't the right time, and timing in life is everything, ain't it? But You gotta believe me when I tell you that if there ever was a time for the truth, it's right now. I do believe that boy's life is dependent on it. But it's too late now, Zouzou pronounced grimly as she gazed vacantly into her coffee cup. Ain't never too late for the truth, Christy offered philosophically. Here's what. I'll tell him for you, if you like. Would you do that for me? Zouzou replied in astonishment, momentarily taken aback at the generosity of his offer, but just as quickly recovered her composure as she added as an afterthought, do you think it could wait until the day after the funeral, when I'm gone? More likely, but I can't make no promises, Christy forewarned her. I suppose you'll also have to tell him who you are, she said resignedly as she lifted her eyes to the 7th floor of the hospital building. Only if you want me to, was Christy's stoic reply. Do whatever you think is best, she told him, holding back tears. I just don't want him to die. I'll get us some more coffee if you like, Sue, Christy then gallantly proposed. I'd like that, Zouzou said as she lit another cigarette, but by the time he returned, she was gone.